We start the evening with Orosur Mining, listed on AIM and TSX, and a favourite with London South East investors. I know that many of you have turned up tonight to see them, and they're on a very exciting journey. Orosur owns 100% of the Anza project in Colombia, which has the potential to be a Tier 1 gold mine. OMI have a 50-50 joint venture at Anza with two of the giants of the gold industry, Newmont Corporation and Agnico Eagle Mines. And Newmont and Agnico are paying for the current drilling operation, which is almost ended there. This morning's RNS almost doubled the market cap. It's up to 46 million. The share price was up 99% at one point, and ended the day, the close of day, it was 83% up. We are delighted to have Brad George, the Orosur CEO, join us live from Perth, Australia, to put this morning's RNS release into context, no doubt. So welcome, George.
The presentation today, it's the first half is going to be a rehash of older slides, I guess, for those who maybe have come in recently and missed the last presentation. I'll try to run through those quite quickly and get to the interesting stuff toward the end on where we are and where we're going. Usual disclaimers, which we all have but nobody reads. This snapshot clearly, I haven't updated it today. The share price had a bit of an exciting day, so we'll update that moving forward. The two key points here, of course, are we're a reasonably small company in terms of shares on issue, 188 million. And the cash on hand is still hovering about $6 million US, courtesy of a capital raising late last year and subsequent exercising of some warrants. And I can only presume with the share price run today, we might get a few more of those exercised over the next couple of days. So that keeps us in a nice, healthy position. And of course, as Donald mentioned, Agnico and Newmont are paying for the bills in Colombia. So that's not being drained down terribly quickly. This is the last time I'll show this slide. Obviously, our history is long, mostly in Uruguay. We've had 20 years running a mine in Uruguay, 1.5 million ounces, and that came to natural end of its life in 2018. And we're at the late stages now, winding that up. So it's coming very close now. That's probably the end of this year. We'll have that largely off the books and done and dusted. And we will be exclusively then a Colombian company. So it's been a fairly rough journey, that transition with that mine winding down, but it's largely done now. And all of the uncertainty attached to that process has largely been washed away now. Just some nice, pretty pictures. Clearly, this is no country for old men, or in my case, old fat men. So I need to get into shape for when I'm allowed to travel again at the end of this year. So it's a lovely country, but it's not for the faint of heart. The Mid-Cauca belt in northwest Colombia is, for some time now, began to show itself as a fairly major gold province. We have some very large projects here. Buritica to the north of us is one that came on stream production-wise beginning of this year. It's over 10 million ounces and lots more to come from there. Probably the most notable exploration project is Los Cerros south of us. They've been doing some very nice intersections over the last couple of months. There's a lot going on, and we're just adding to what is becoming a quite exciting story for this part of the world. Quick snapshot of our lease holdings. The green leases are granted tenements. The red are applications that remain to be granted. I'll use my little mouse here. So the Aptar deposit where we're drilling is this little bunch of leases in the middle here, with the Aragon Fault running up from the south to the north. These two main applications are our focus on being granted hopefully this year or early next year. We're pushing those forward, but there are some issues there with largely COVID-related delays in the admin process. Total area of about 200 square kilometres, so it's a nice land package. The joint venture with Agnico and Newmont is a fairly complicated one. It extends over 12 years, over which time they would be required to spend $26 million and make cash payments to us of $4 million, giving them a pathway to move to a total equity position of 75% in the project, not in the company. We're coming now to the end of the third year, so really only just beginning. Excuse me. The anniversary date is 7th September, where Agnico and Newmont would be required to make a decision to roll over into year 4. That hasn't been made yet. That's entirely their decision, but I would imagine, given the recent results, that's likely to continue. Just some regional geology. We're at the eastern side of the Andes, so we're in what we refer to as a back arc basin behind the Andean Cordillera. A large sequence of volcanics and sediments and north-south structures, along which most of these major deposits are being found. Buritica obviously being directly along strike, about 50 kilometres away. So it's we're in the right location, which always helps. Locally, we, as I've commented before, we're still getting our heads around what's going on here. This is certainly the gold phase is very much an epithermal gold project, but we're seeing evidence of an older volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit, which is some base metals. Age-wise, these are very young. We're looking at the gold events that are only 5 to 8 million years ago, so it's really only yesterday in geological time. So, which is a nice situation to be in terms of the rock still being fresh and fairly easy to work with. We have a major structural corridor running north-south, which is the Agnico Fault, but it's this subsidiary structure running up here, the Aragon Fault, that we think is the major driver and the major host of exploration. We have a series of volcanics off to the east, some sediments, and this major breccia package in the middle that has filled out the Aragon Fault zone. That is a major host of exploration. We have what we think is a fairly large porphyry intrusion here north at La Sasita, which we postulate might be the fluid and the heat source for all of this, but that's yet to be determined. The question we've been asked in the past is where this project has been. It's had a long, somewhat checkered history. We acquired the project in 2014 via the acquisition of a Canadian company, Waymar Resources. They had previously done quite a lot of drilling. They had also done some work with Anglo American, some sampling in the region, but they basically ran out of money in a period of time when the markets were then closed to mining in Canada. Orosur did a very small drilling program in 16-17, but then Orosur, sadly, in hindsight, became financially stressed as the Uruguay mine was winding down, and therefore the project really sat on the back burner. We simply couldn't afford to run the project, which is where Newmont came in late 2018. Sadly, almost to the day that JV was signed, there was security issues in Colombia. There was some issue with some geologists at Buritica, and Newmont backed away for security reasons. So very little was done, and it all kicked off again late last year with the entry of Agnico into the project in October, and then the commencement of drilling in November. So the share price really kicked off with Agnico coming into the party. I've shown this slide a few times, and I'll probably show it a few more times, and it illustrates the problem and the opportunity that we've got with the previous drilling. Waymar, the previous owners, did a lot of drilling. They did 18,000 meters, which seems a lot, but almost exclusively they drilled in the wrong direction, which is slightly annoying, but there you go. And while these holes were on paper very interesting, and they gave very long intersections of high grade, geologically they're almost useless. They told us nothing about the geology, and they're even less than useful when it came to calculating a resource. We had to really turn everything around and drill from the other side and drill toward the west to understand the continuity from hole to hole. So it was a nice batch of drill holes to have, in the sense that it told us where the gold was, but we had to go back and almost repeat everything to get the information geologically to allow us to develop resources. So a good problem, but there's the opportunity. To the results today, I won't go into them in huge detail. The markets obviously enjoyed them. There's not a lot to say about holes of 60 meters at 10 grams. You don't get those very often. I certainly haven't in my life, so it's nice to get a few in before I retire. but very interesting. It's both thick and it's high grade, which are the two things you really want to get. We've released 9 holes today. That's 19 to date, up to MAP 091. We're currently drilling 095, and we would expect those assays to be coming in weeks and months, but sadly the assay delays continue. As we noted, we did at one point have 5 drill rigs running. We've now reduced to 1. That's not the project. That is simply what the plan was. We had a plan of 9,500 meters. We brought in enough rigs to enable us to do that program in the time that we wanted, and now we're coming to the end. We can reduce to 1 rig and move at a more steady pace. We now are getting to the point where we can begin to develop 3D models around this, which is where things get interesting. The drilling was designed to address certain questions geologically. They've been largely addressed, and now we're beginning to wrap some numbers around some resource and tonnages here. I'd also note that the base metals still remain extremely high. We didn't announce these, but they were small intersections, but we had in spot zinc up to 30-odd%, 4% lead and a couple of % copper. So that comes back to the overprint of the recent gold upon the previous base metals deposit. There's a reasonably good correlation that the two inhabit the same space, but there's not a one-to-one correlation between gold and base metal grades. That's a very nice sweetener and something we need to examine in future, that's going to make a big impact in economics. But for the moment, it remains a gold project with the base metals being a problem for tomorrow, a nice problem to have for tomorrow. The recent drilling has certainly changed our understanding of what's happening to a certain extent. We got a bit carried away with our first hole back at the beginning of the year, thinking it was going to be easy. That served us right. What we're now finding is that the main fault region of the Aragon Fault plain is mineralized to a low level, but then every now and then it blows open to these large pods of very thick, very high grade mineralization. Now, this is not unusual. This is sort of the way things work. I don't want to give you a lesson in structural geology because I'd fail, but we need to understand the structural controls that are driving these major blowouts, because these things are where the money is. From a mining point of view and from a tonnage point of view, the ounces and the dollars are in these big, thick, high-grade pods. And so we need to define where these go and how big they are. And the bits in between are the cream on the cake, but the money is in these pods. So we need to focus drilling now on defining these chutes. Now, why they exist, I guess, is a point still to be determined, but it's a reasonably accepted rule that these gold-bearing faults are not mineralized along their entire length. Otherwise, we would be dripping in gold. It tends to be where the structures bend, and they can bend for all kinds of reasons. They might be wrapping around a granite, or there might be intersections of several faults, but it's where these structures bend, and then we get movement along that fault. And the movement and the deviation of the fault pops open these dilation zones, a dilational jog or whatever term you want to use. It pops open these open spaces into which the gold-bearing fluids then flow. So it's understanding both on a macro and a micro scale, because geology tends to be quite fractal, where the major deviations in the fault are and where these dilation zones have popped open. And those are the areas we focus on with our drilling. I will also point out that these pods we've got here, these are not complete. These have not incorporated the recent drilling. And we've got a couple of holes that are currently underway in here that hopefully will fill this gap in. So this is a couple of weeks old, but it will be infilled in coming weeks. This is probably the most important slide from a takeaway, that of what happens next. And that question really is one of, depends who's asking and depends who's being asked. This red model here is an attempt at us to do a three-dimensional resource model on the northern half of APTA. The southern half, Danny, hasn't been done yet. We've still got a few more holes coming in. So we as a company and Agnico as well, we certainly have the ability now to develop models of the mineralization of this, dare I call it an ore body, to give ourselves some idea of tons and grade, but we can't tell you about it. This is purely for internal consumption. We obviously are prohibited from mentioning this to the market, or mentioning numbers to the market, unless they become 43-101 compliant. The question is, do we want to do that? And the answer at the moment is no. And that's not because of it's a bad idea, it's because it's not our decision. Now, this is a combination of issues to do with timing, planning, and the issues with the laboratory. The main driver for the drill program we had was to give Agnico and Newmont enough information about APTA to allow them to come to the decision point about now, where they could roll over to the 4th year of the JV. So as I mentioned, that begins in September. So they need to be making decisions now whether they wish to commit another $4 million next year. So they needed to get enough drilling done by a certain point in time to make themselves sufficiently comfortable to move forward. So we've come to that point now, and they're presumably having their assessments. The other problem we face, of course, is the ongoing delays from the assay labs in Peru, where we are at a point, and have been at a point for a while now, where it's taking us twice as long to get assays as it takes to drill the hole. It doesn't take a mathematical genius to realise that that's not sustainable, that every day we drill, we're falling further behind. So we pushed that as far as we could with the 5 rigs running, but we've now reached a point where there are thousands of samples in the lab. We really can't continue because we're beginning to, it's getting expensive. Obviously the holes released this morning, there were some very good holes, but clearly there were some less good holes. But that's how exploration goes. But with every hole costing between $50,000 and $70,000, we do really want to improve our hit to miss ratio somewhat by having a little bit better targeting. So we need to wind back to 1 rig, allow the lab to catch up so that we have a little more information in our hands for positioning each hole. The other point I'd make, of course, is that we're just coming out of wet season. And so drilling at APTA, where we have good access, good roads and a good camp, was a good place to be during the rainy season. The wet season's just ended, so we can now get guys into the field in more remote regions. So the seasons do play a part. So in terms of, do we convert this to a resource? Well, if this was just an Orosur project and it was our money, I think the answer would probably be yes. We probably would stay here and drill this to a resource, because as a small single asset company, having a JORC or 41 resource would be a good underpinning for our valuation. That's not our money. Agnico and Newmont are paying the bills, and so they therefore drive the strategy. And they don't really care about resources. They, as 2 combined companies, they're sitting on resource bases of 150 million ounces. So a couple of million more ounces here is of no interest and no impact on their share price. And therefore they have no incentive to move this to a resource. What they want to know is, what is the ultimate potential of the entire Anza project? So their thinking presumably is going to be, well, we know APTA now is interesting. Let's continue drilling that slowly, but we can, to a large extent now, just sit it aside for a while. And now that the rains have stopped, head up and down strike of the Aragon Fault and look for more of these things to get a sense of what the ultimate endowment potential is, and then come back and move these things through. And we may well find, of course, that this is not the best one. We may find more of these things, we might find better ones. So their view is to now step back and look at the wider potential. And I'd also make the point that we've now drilled, well, we and Waymar in the past now have drilled about 33,000 metres. Politica in the north have drilled over 350,000 metres. So we're really only beginning this game. This is a nice little satellite image of the digital terrain. So this is the mountains and valleys. One of the beauties of these young rocks and this rugged terrain is you can actually see the faults, because the faults are show up in the terrain. The rivers and creeks exploit these faults, and so we can see nicely, if you can see my cursor, the Aragon Fault running up here from the south, We have a major bend here at Aptar, not coincidentally, where we're seeing the Aptar mineralization coming up. It then bends into this license, another big bend, and then trundles nicely up to the north and a few more little bends. And then we have subsidiary structures coming off here, parallel structures running down here and here. So we're able to know where to go, in the sense that we know where the structure goes in a general sense, and that helps us focus our field work somewhat significantly. We're not wandering the bush blind. We know pretty much exactly where to go. So this is the wider region and some new prospects that we've developed over the last couple of months. As I noted previously, the Aptar project was drilled by us and by Waymar, not because it was the best, because it was the one that we could get at the easiest. There was an old historical gypsum mine over the top of Aptar. And as a result, there was some tracks and pads and clearings. So it was an easy place to get at. These areas to the north and to the south have never been touched. The access is poor. We're getting into them now on the backs of horses and trekking in with backpacks. So really, we have no idea what's happening up here. We're looking at a few new prospects. We have Pepino here, that's recently been named, and Pepas to the north. So you'll probably hear more about those in the future. The Charascala prospect, there was a few holes still there a few years ago. Interesting, but not our main issue. The Guamarala prospect, south down strike along from Aptar, is very exciting. That's more of a land access issue. So we're in negotiation now with the landowners, and that's going well. We want to be working there reasonably soon. Jesuitas is the one that I find quite exciting, because this is where we see this major bend in the structure. This, however, is not yet granted. So while we can do mapping and sampling and geophysics there, we can't drill until that's granted. So that's more end of this year or later next year.
Okay, you've got a couple more minutes, please, Brad. A couple more minutes.
And to the south here, we'll do some more work as well. All right. The sampling isn't just wandering around. This is all owned land, farmland. So we do need to understand who owns the land, talk to the farmers. Obviously, these pictures down here, the wet season can make this rather exciting. We've had a few geos washed away, but we did get them back. So that was fun. But what we're seeing is very interesting. We know there's a major fault here, and getting into the field, we find what we expect to find, where we expect to find it. So we're seeing quartz veins, we're seeing sulfides, we're seeing all the right kind of stuff up and down along strikes. So it's nice when you go look something and you find it, and we'll look at getting in here in the very near term to do more work. Geophysics is next. Drilling to the north is expensive due to the need to build access, and so therefore we're going to start with some induced polarization surveys first. Because we have a very good correlation of high sulfides with gold, IP should work well. So this is a very fast and moderately cheap way of giving us some direct drill targets before we then bite the bullet and get into those areas with the drilling. The drilling, as I said, will be expensive with tracks and even chopper support. So we do the easy stuff first. So where does that leave us? I'm conscious of the time. So we're going to keep drilling. One rig is at Aptar, and that will stay there and slowly grind away, focusing on these high-grade shoots. So there'll be hopefully good news flow coming out of that. The major milestone we face is the rollover of the JV beginning of September. That obviously is beyond my control. Agnico and Newmont will make their assessments and inform us in due time. I'm sure we'll be the last to know. But I would be quietly confident that they will roll over, but that will happen obviously in August. We'll continue mapping and sampling, and we'll be releasing geochemical results from those programs in coming weeks as the laboratories in Peru and Colorado bring those forward. The IP surveys commence the end of this month, beginning of August. That's again a wet season issue. You don't do IP surveys in the middle of rain because you're going to kill somebody. So that's the wet season issue. And then we'll be releasing those results as they come in over the next couple of months, with a view that with access and targets, we can commence drilling on new targets in that northeastern area, October, November this year, with a view that moving into next year, we will have, or hopefully have, 2, 3 or 4 targets, with a couple of those being drilled at any one time, but with APTA, I guess, being the most advanced and moving forward. So it's an interesting time, lots to do, and it's a nice situation to be in, to be drilling one high-grade target and a couple of things that might hopefully be similar. So I do thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Shall we do some Q&A?
Well, I'm awake, so you might as well.
Okay, my first question, Newmont Agnico are looking for a large, I think it's a 5 million ounce gold project. So a really, really, really large project. And what's their exploration strategy to achieve that?
The actual size limit will depend. I mean, Agnico is a smaller company, so they can probably get away with maybe 3, but Newmont, they need to deal with things that are 5, 6, 7 million ounces. So we know there's no shortcuts here. The evidence of APTA tells us that this is a fertile system. So we know that the gold is there. We know we're seeing high grade, we're seeing thick, we're seeing all the right things that tell us that this is a very interesting place to be, and that we've got 20 kilometers of a major structure that is essentially untouched. So we just grind along. We get into the bush and we walk along this structure and we find the areas that we look interesting. We do the geochemistry, we do the geophysics, and we drill. So it's not rocket science, it's just hard work.
How much of that 5, 6, 7 or 3, depending on which of the companies it is, how much of it is actually has already been found and discovered and being explored by you in APTA?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to tell you a number on APTA because, as I mentioned, that's falling into the compliance bag with sort of their 101. But to give you can do the you can do the numbers. If you start getting 10 grams a ton over any kind of width, then you accumulate ounces very, very fast. And this is what made Buritica a very attractive project. 1 million ounces at those kind of grades fits into a block of ground only a couple of 100 meters long. So I'm not going to speculate about numbers because that's one, I don't know, and 2, I really can't be saying. But I would say we certainly have made a pretty good start to moving toward a multi-million ounce field.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for telling us what you can. And what about the $4 million of exploration money, year 4? You said you weren't sure, or you said you were fairly sure that was going to happen. Actually, is that fair enough? September they have to.
Yes, well, I don't speak on their behalf. So I mean, they will make their decisions in their own time and their own way. And they'll inform us when the time comes. So we know what data we've acquired to allow them to assess that. That's the drilling has been done. We're still waiting on the geochemistry and the more regional leg sampling. So I'm not going to put my hand in the heart and say yes, they're going to roll over. But I would say if I was a betting man, it would be very hard to walk away from 60 meters at 10 grams.
And they have already, you on their behalf have already started exploring, part of their strategy, looking for new APTAs. Yes,
I mean it's a slightly odd hybrid arrangement in that we do the work but they pay for it. Now there have been comments about that they do have the right to assume operational control. Now that's something that they may or may not do, but that to me is not the main issue because I commented in the past, it won't change much. It'll make my life easier, but it won't change much on the ground. The same people do the same job, they'll just be wearing a different shirt. So I think they probably will, but if they didn't, then I wouldn't be surprised because, well, the project's been run well, so why make your life even harder by stepping in and doing all the miserable work? So, look, I'm confident, but that's very much a wait and see thing for the market. I'm sorry.
Okay. What about the lab in Lima? The delays are continuing. Is there anything you can do to speed up the delivery of these assays?
Sadly not. The first assay problem we experienced was just labour due to the first burst of COVID beginning of this year. But then it came down to, oddly enough, argon gas. We do fire assay for gold and we do ICP-MS for base metals. The P stands for plasma. It's an argon plasma. And sadly, with the major surge in Peru over the last few months, the government quite reasonably told all the gas manufacturers to re-gear toward making medical oxygen. So there was no argon forever. So that's becoming relaxed now, and the problem's to a degree going away, but as a result, there's now a huge backlog. So yes, it's being corrected, but it's not being corrected today. It'll be over the next few weeks, it'll begin to improve, we hope. But sadly, no, we can't impact on that at all.
Okay, let's go to the Agnico having the right to assume control of the project. Do you have a sense of that, and what would they do, and what would it mean? And would the project
I think they would like to, because they would then not have to deal with me, and I'm a fairly annoying git. So I think they do. And
how much would they have to pay for that? What would the price be?
Oh, zero. They just assume control as and when they want to. But they will take all of our staff and they will become Agnico and Newmont staff, or the local company that they formed, Minera Aguila. So it's not a difficult transition. What do
the OMI shareholders get out of that?
Nothing really. The same things will happen. The same things go on by the same people. The same drilling goes on. The information flow remains. So really, there's nothing at all that impacts on Orosur other than me not having to do monthly reports. So it's a very small change. In fact, it's almost insignificant change in terms of Orosur. So I wouldn't put a lot of stress onto that.
Okay. What about
What
about if they actually buy you out? So say in several years' time they decide to buy you out. What's your take on that, and how do you actually maximize the benefit to shareholders in that?
Well, we're not for sale. Well, I'm saying we're not for sale. This isn't my decision. We again have no control. I doubt they would. I mean, they have what they want. They have a pathway to move this through to 75%, so they can sit back and take their time. You know, should a monster be found and they want to get rid of us, then that's entirely their call. The only thing we can do is to make sure, which is what we have done, is to make sure that we have the balance sheet strength to make them pay as high a price as possible. You don't want to be in a position where you're running out of cash and you're sitting on a big asset. So all we can do is just make ourselves a hard target.
Okay, so the whole idea is to keep your balance sheet healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrew Robson asks the very valid point. Do you anticipate COVID causing disruption to operations? Well, you've just told us COVID already lack of argon is disrupting operations. What else is happening with COVID?
Well, COVID is still there. Columbia's having they're a bit like Australia, and they're very slow or somewhat slow to begin vaccination. But they're ramping up quite aggressively now. So COVID is relaxing and we will hopefully see the impact of the vaccination program flowing through to the numbers over the next couple of weeks and months. So we think we're past the worst of it. We've survived this far. We've had a few little scares and a few little cases here and there, but we clamped down quite quickly. So we've done a good job to this point. And now I think with the dry season coming in, COVID not falling away, but certainly becoming less of an issue, we're quite comfortable now that we're moving into a slightly easier time. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the COVID thing is not gone, but going.
Okay, fantastic. Now let me conjoin two questions. Nathan Peters asks a couple of questions. He wishes that the board had more than 1% of the shares in issue, and the second point is he wishes communications with retail shareholders were better, more use of Twitter, more pictures from the site, etc. So, what are your thoughts on those two? That's my final question.
Yeah, I wish I owned more shares as well. But in terms of direct buying shares, one, I'm not rich. Would that I were. But the primary issue there is that when you're drilling, it's almost impossible not to be in possession of information that's market sensitive. It just doesn't happen. Now, from the day I joined the company, I knew stuff that meant I couldn't trade, and there were a few little gaps here and there that we could. But when you're drilling, you just can't do it. I mean, as soon as I get a WhatsApp text from my geo saying that hit something sparkly, I'm off the board. So really, until the drill rig stopped turning, it's almost impossible for us to be buying, sadly. In terms of communication, well, yeah, that's always an interesting problem. It's never enough or it's too much. Again, you know, we have made a decision to run the company in a very conservative way, and we're not going to change from that. We don't want to be seen as a company that's promoting simply for the sake of promotion. We want the results and the project to speak for itself. So we will communicate with the market in a very rigid way based upon results, with maybe the odd commentary here and there. And hopefully once COVID's gone, I can travel, then we'll do some more face-to-face stuff. But I'm not going to fall in the trap of simply tweeting every day because people want some sort of clickbait. Once the results are there, we'll move forward. And I would hope that with the increased activity in the more regional areas, in conjunction with the drilling we're going to carry on Aptar, there will be more happening anyway. So hopefully there'll be a natural progression to more information flow just as we get busier. So, and that may keep them happy. But to simply tweet for tweeting's sake is not my thing, sorry. Okay.
Brad, you've got up, you're speaking to us in the middle of the night from Perth, Australia. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for spending the time and literally drilling down, as you might say, on your operations for us. You're a complete star. Thank you so much.